Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hi.
Welcome to Knots and Twists Intro to Macrame with Jesse.
Hi, I'm Jesse.
Jesse, how long have people been asking you to teach class?
About 3 years now.
About 3 years. Like, I believe it was March of 2021.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Isn't that when you started too?
Yep.
Yeah.
So it was like when I first started, Sam wanted me to do kind of an intro post of like who I am and what I'll be doing for the shop and stuff like that, and post some of my work. And so I posted some of my work, and naturally it was like, we need a class.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get there. And so 3 years later, here we are.
3 years later, here we are. So you're welcome. We got him here. We're going to keep him here for as long as we can. And maybe this is the first of like a series of Jesse classes.
Yeah. And it's only going to take a decade to do like 3 classes.
We'll try to do it in less time than a decade.
It'll be 9 years if we do every 3 years. So we'll be less than a
okay,
decade.
Less than 9 years. You know, there's nothing wrong with like a once a month thing.
No, I don't have that kind of time.
No.
I do not have that kind of time.
Hello, Brooke. Hello, Stephanie. Hello, Jennifer. Hello to everyone popping in, and hello to everyone watching the replay. Jesse, are you ready?
I'm as ready as I can be.
Excellent. Why did you, or how did you get into macrame?
So when I first started, my mom bought me a Native American choker kit from Michael's when I was probably like 5.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved it, but it was just like string together, tie, and you're done. And it wasn't cheap, and there was nothing extra. It was that you get everything for the kit, you make the kit, and you're done. And so we didn't have a whole lot of money, but I was like, I want more. And so we went back to Michael's, and just looking at all the stuff that you could make with, I stumbled upon the hemp and wooden beads, which was like maybe $10 for 50 bracelets worth or something like that. So that's how I got started with macrame or knotting. I was also a Boy Scout, so I already loved knots in general. Well, I guess I'd be a Cub Scout at that time, but so I was already loved knots and the whole process. And then it just kind of went from there. And then like when I was in middle school, especially when you kind of start defining who you are, I was more on like the skater punk hippie kind of side. And so I was already like making these bracelets, and then everybody wanted them. So it spiraled into this bigger thing. And then it wasn't until probably 2014 or 2015 that I started developing more, because I was just doing like square knots and half square twists and stuff. And I was just like, what can I do to take it to the next level? And so I just started adding more strands and trying to figure out what to do with them. And then I kind of stumbled upon the double alternating square knot. So that's been like
is that your go-to knot?
That's kind of my go-to. That's what all of these bigger ones are. They're all like variations.
Can you kind of walk through and tell the people what we have?
Well, so we'll start. This is like the standard. It's just a single chain square knot. And then if you compare it to, I think probably this one shows it the best. So you have a single chain square knot, and then you have a double alternating square knot. So we're doing square knots on the outside and on the inside. So you can see there's a space there. And
That's amazing.
The square knots on the inside and then alternating on the outside. And that allows us to be able to put beads on the outside and the inside. So like this is kind of a good example of that.
Wow.
Where you can see beads on the inside, knots on the outside, not on the inside, beads on the outside. So we're alternating kind of where we're at. And once you kind of have this down, you can just keep going wider and wider. That's kind of where tapestry weaving comes into play. There's other knotting methods that are more typical macrame that would be more like once you start getting that wide, square knots, it's going to take longer and you're going to use a lot more material.
What's the widest piece you've ever made?
The widest?
Yeah, like how many strings?
So these are 2, and then they're folded in half. So these are 2, and then folded in half. Well, this one's not actually. So at one point too, I started kind of playing around with other methods, kind of the go-to is a loop on one side and then either a bead or a button on the other side, and that's your clasp. But I wanted to just keep refining it, so I found these kind of like cloth crimp ends that I really liked. So this one isn't, but neither of those are. But either way, so you could do two strands and then you fold it in half to tie your loop, and that gives you 4 strands. These are 4 strands tied in half, gives you 8 strands. So I've done 8 strands, which gives you 16. And then I did 3 rows. So adding 1 more, so it's like a triple alternating square knot, which it gets very confusing. And then
but today's not about confusing.
No, it's not about confusing. Today's starting from the basics. If you've never knotted before, we're going to start there, and then probably not going to finish a whole project just because I could do these pretty quick, but my goal is we're going to kind of demo this, and then we're going to work up to demoing this. So hopefully by the end of class, everybody will be able to make a double alternating square knot chain. We can get naughty. Yes, very naughty. We're getting very naughty. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a chaos class. So we're here because we're friends and we're like, yes, we're going to do this knotting class. Do we know exactly where we're going with it? No. Absolutely not. No, we're just not at all. We've got him here. Let's just take advantage of that. All right. So shall we get started? How do we want to start? I'm going to switch it just to the solo layout. Yes. So first we're going to take our 2 pieces. I have 125-pound weight hemp, so it's super easy to demo what I'm going to do, and you can see it before we get to the tiny stuff. I'm going to fold it in half so I have a bite on one side. And the simplest, easiest way is to just do a single bite into itself. With this hemp, it's very big, but this is going to be your basic starting point. Right on time. Basic starting point, and you can use this, you don't need to make it any fancier. You can see on some of these, I actually do half hitches to make the loop. That way you can have a little more control and it just looks a little bit nicer. But starting out, and I still will use this method just because it's so easy and straightforward. I'm going to attempt to use a tying station so that I can keep tension on it. Is something like the tying station needed, or can people just get started without one? It's definitely not needed. I would say it can definitely be helpful. That way, if you're doing it freehand or not anchored to anything, you're going to have to hold kind of multiple points to get the tension right. So if you're just starting out and you have a tie station, you can do that. You can also just tape it down to your desk. What I would typically do is I would take another piece of hemp and put it through, back this up a little bit. There we go. I would put a piece through here and make its own loop so that I can tie it to the table leg or the couch or whatever it may be. Yeah. Sometimes I would actually just put it over like around my ankle so that I can pull and adjust the tension. Because the tension is really what's gonna be a big difference between okay knots and really, really nice knots. And what makes a nice knot? Tight and uniform. Okay. That's gonna be where's my tray? Oh, my pieces on it. Yep, right there. Yeah. So examples of good knots is this. So very uniform, very tight, very close together, and the knots themselves are tight. I know you can't feel it, but it actually feels pretty hard for being just kind of string or twine or hemp. And the knots will start binding on each other and make them even tighter. So all that tension is going to give you these nice uniform knots and makes it a really nice finished piece. I have one here. So this one is not nearly as tight as I would have liked it to be. And you can see it's kind of messy. It's almost even like muddy. Do we have a white tray? Yes. Just to get a little more contrast. So to me, like, this isn't really that nice. It's not totally uniform. I see some of the middle chain knots aren't as tight as they should be versus something like this where you can really see the pattern. It's much more consistent. All the knots line up and they're very tight. So that's really, I think, what kind of elevates a knotted piece, at least if you're using hemp. Like if you're using something like nylon or any recycled plastic stuff, they don't have as much freedom to move around. They're already pretty tense. So you don't have to worry too much about putting tension on the knots to make it as tight or as uniform. They'll kind of want to do it on their own, just on the type of material they are. Okay. So I have my single bite here. And the first thing I like to do is, you can see they kind of have a place when they're coming out. So to make your starting point a little nicer, you can kind of play around with them and pull them a little bit. So now I have 2 middle, which is going to be this main formation of my chain. I'm going to knot around it. And then I have my 2 outside pieces. So I'm going to put these in the bottom of the tie station and pull it. And hopefully get some nice
tension. So I guess we can move it. Yeah. Put your hemp down there and then just kind of tightened it so that you have that nice strong tension. Okay. So
the main formation is, we're just going to be dealing with square knots. So a square knot is going to be, the saying is either right over left, left over right, or left over right, right over left. So I typically start with the left. The left is going to go, there we go. The left is going to go over the top. The right is going to go over the left, underneath, and then through. So it's kind of like a simple knot, but it goes around this middle piece, and then we can tighten it up. So this is half a square knot. So to do a complete square knot, we do the opposite. So then we're going to go right over left, left over right, under the center chain, and up through the hole. So that is 1 full square knot. That's going to be kind of the base of everything we're going to be working on. And if you ever get lost or confused on where you're at, you see how this goes over and this one, it goes under. So wherever the bite goes over on the square knot, this one is what's going to go back over the top. So because this goes over the top, this is going to go over the top. This goes under. And now we have 1.5 square knots. So the nice thing about square knots is that when you put them in stacks like this, based on your measurements, if you want to get to a specific measurement, you could end on a half. It's totally fine. You just need to remember which half you ended on, because once we get into the double alternating, everything needs to be very symmetrical and stay the same. Why aren't you working on anything, Shyra?
I'm watching
Pure
you.
chaos.
I'm watching you.
So if we don't do that and we just repeat that same action and we do left over right again, you're going to see that we start getting a twist. And if we do it again, we'll get more of a twist. And if we keep doing that, you could actually make a spiral pattern, which can, on a single chain, can be really fun, or like on a necklace or bracelets. You can
like those
do some really fun things, honestly.
Beginner friendship bracelets when we're little.
Pretty much, yeah. So if we keep going with this, you can see we're starting to get a nice twist to it. Can't do this in an exponential pattern like a full square knot, because it just would not work. But I really like it for certain things, especially I'll do like on a necklace, I'll do from where like the connector is down to like collarbones. You could do a twist. And then when you finish a full twist, you could either put a bead or just go right into full square knots. And so you have some like movement around your neck, a little more interesting than just plain square knots. But for our demo, we're going to be worrying about full knots, not halves.
So Miss Jazz asks a question. She says, when it starts twisting, do you have to adjust it?
So if it starts twisting,
and you don't want it to twist.
And you don't want it to twist, you probably messed up one of the knots and did 2 halves in a row versus completing the whole knot. So right now, even though I'm in the middle of a half, because this bite goes over, I know if I wanted to go back to full square knots, I can take the one that's over and go over under. And if I do that one more, I'm running out of hemp here. One thing to note, we'll get into measurements a little later, but the bigger your cord is, the more it's going to shrink. So you can kind of see that there. So I stopped doing the halves and I went and I made it whole. And so now we're back to flat. There will be like very few occasions where it'll kind of want to twist on its own. Most likely it's because there's a really tight knot followed by looser knots followed by really tight knots. So that's one way that it can twist. The beauty of that though is you could actually just kind of move it around, smush it down a little bit, tighten it up. Worst case is I would backtrack to where the twist is and look at your knots and see if potentially you did 2 halves in a row. That's, I think 90% of the time when I have a twist, that's actually the problem, is I did 2 halves instead of 1 whole.
Okay. Fractions in math, Jesse.
So now that we have the main demo out of the way on the big scale, so you can just have a better idea of how those knots should look, we can do one more here. So going from twist and then right back into fulls. So you could totally make the transition. It's not a huge step. You just need to be aware of where you're starting. So on the side here, you can see I have my stacked halves, and then I go back to make a full, and then I did one more full on top of it. So now we're back to flat. You could alternate as much as you like. You can actually do a half twist like this, and then get to here and actually just reverse it. So you kind of get this like wobbly pattern, which can be really fun. Okay, so I guess we will jump into, we'll just jump into it.
Just jump into it. Just jump in. So, I have no idea what I'm doing, so I'm learning from you as well.
So my go-to standard measurement for smaller twine or hemp or cordage is, if I'm making single chains, I do about 2 feet per inch of knotting. If I'm doing like this double alternating style, then I'm actually going to go up to 3 feet because I'm going to make more knots and I'm going to use up more cord. And then I also like to buffer in more on the ends because they will start to fray. As you can see, there's a little fray on there already. And so to combat that, a lot of times too, if I'm working on bigger pieces that have a lot of beads, it's naturally going to fray no matter what I do. So I'm going to have to keep cutting the end. But what I like to use is instant dry nail polish like clear coat, because it's instant drying. It doesn't soak into the fiber, so it doesn't expand them, and you don't need much. So I'm going to put a little drop on the end. I'm going to see which way it twists, and I'm going to twist with it. And then we have a clean edge, and we have a little coating to help prevent it from fraying, and it's skin safe. So E6000 is very not much skin safe.
Okay, so Jesse uses the real stuff. Shyra uses E6000 and just kind of wings it. But it's better than like saliva. It is. And beeswax doesn't always work. So
no, I love using the instant dry. It's by far the best thing that I found. Even like you can see there's
let go of my E6000
where the coating is. No matter what we put on the tip to keep it from fraying, if we're using small beads or beads with small holes, eventually it's going to fray. There's almost nothing we can do to prevent that. But at least this, because I am touching it with my hands to roll it in, it is skin safe because it's nail polish. So I'm going to roll, let's see here. I guess I'm going to do about 8 feet. See how far we get through this.
I'm always terrified of running out of whatever thread or cordage that I'm using. I always use too much.
You know, I would rather use too much than get to the end of a 4-hour project and realize I don't have enough.
Yep.
Because that is way worse. It is, you can still kind of salvage it. There are ways you can work in additional hemp. It's very difficult though because of the volume that hemp takes up, or cordage in general. You're going to get like a little bulge.
Yeah.
One way you can do it is you can start undoing knots and get back to a point where you have enough length and then just finish it that way. You could also use those pinch clasp like I had on the one piece.
Yeah.
So you can undo it, put one of those on, add chain, and make up the difference. So I have one measured, and I'm just going to use that to and I'm just going to use that to go with my other measurement so that they're all about the same length. So now we are to that, and we're going to do this for all 4 cords.
So what are you doing? There you go.
So I'm just using the first cord I cut to measure my other cords so that they're all the same length. And then we're going to kind of dab up each end with the nail polish so that we have some nice clean edges when we go to put on some beads.
Ooh, between the nail polish and the E6000, it might turn into a chaos class.
It's like, definitely going to turn into a chaos class.
It's a little strong.
Thankfully, I think this is not too fumey. It smells it, but it's like not. It's more just the smell of it.
Our brain cells are not going away right now.
Okay, so 1, 2, 3, and one more. So while you're doing this, if you use the same method that I'm using, it is great to keep all of your cord kind of in line with each other, because it's not too much of an issue with bracelets because they're not super, super long, but anything over like 7 or 8 inches, if you're using this method, you're going to have, I think on average, I was using about 75 feet of cord for a 7-inch bracelet.
I'm sorry, did you say 75 feet?
75 feet.
For a 7-inch bracelet?
Yes.
Okay.
So entropy comes from order. And so you start ordering all your strands up, and then they want to bite and twist on each other. And it could be a very big headache. So for anything longer, I actually use either hair clips or rubber bands or hair ties. I like the hair ties because they don't grab as much. So basically what I would do, we'll get this together and I'll show you. Okay, so we have our 4 cords. We're going to go from one end and just kind of line them up so that they're about the same starting point. It doesn't have to be perfect because, again, we're going to be cutting these as they fray. They're not going to be totally matching each other, but that's absolutely fine. So we're going to take one end and we're going to do that same method of kind of pulling all the cords straight because they're already going to start getting tangled. So now I have both ends, and we're going to slide all the way back to the middle. So this is what I was saying, where they're going to start tangling and biting each other. So when you have really long projects, it is a huge headache. So now we have our middle. We're going to do the same thing because, again, I think it's easiest way to start and still one of my go-tos because it's very easy, quick, and it just works. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So I have all 4 there. We'll use, for these smaller ones that are a little more lightweight, I like to use buttons. So I just want to check that my button is going to fit. It's actually a little big. So I'm just going to slide these knots up towards it. And then when I tighten them, I'm going to tighten them towards the button so that it's a little bit more snug than it is. You could use beads, you could use buttons. If you're super fancy and you have awesome clasps, definitely use those. So I'm just going to tighten each half here as we go, or each cord here as we go, and slide it up towards that hole. because like I said, it was a little loose compared to the button, and I like just a little more of a snug fit. I'm going to go through every single one. So that bite just got a whole lot smaller. I could see one here has a little kind of bubble. I might be able to pull it out. Maybe not. That's okay. Part of the beauty of working with hemp too, oh, I got it, is that it's not perfect and you just kind of roll with it and it's fine. Okay, so we have our loops in. So we have our starting point here. I feel like I'm just gonna like tighten this. It's gonna shatter. Yeah. Okay.
There you go.
So
nice
we got that. So at this point, we kind of have to decide, because we're using two colors, which color goes on the outside or the inside. I'm gonna go with gray on the outside. So I'm gonna pick one gray and pull it to the left, and then I'm gonna pick another gray and pull it to the right. And those are going to be my outside leads. I'm going to take the two browns, do the same thing, separate a left and a right. And now I have my inside chain here. So now it's kind of the same thing where I need to decide the inside and outs. So I'm going to go with brown on the inside and gray on the outside for the inside chain. So this inside chain starting off is going to be just like how we saw before. The only downside is that these tying stations actually aren't going to work that great for this, because I am going to be knotting with every cord. So I can't have just one here. But to start, I think that's fine. So I'm going to start with the right and go over the left. Left is going to go over, under, and through. We're going to pull that through. And then when you're doing more than one cord, definitely be mindful when you're pulling stuff through, especially with hemp, because it has a little more friction to it, that you don't pull other cords with it. And the first knot, especially on something like this, I want to slide and tighten kind of a lot, because I want a nice, sturdy, flat base. And so that's not really the greatest. And then we're going to go the left over, right goes over the left, underneath the center chain, and through. So we have our first square knot done on the inside. And again, I said I want that first set to be very tight and push towards the end. Otherwise, it'll can get like kind of warped or funky when you're starting out. So I have the first one done on the inside. I'm actually going to do, I think I'm going to do one more. I'm going to do 2 full square knots to start. Okay, so we have 2 full square knots to start. Now, this is where it's going to go a lot different from that first demo. So now we have our 2 square knots on the first. So what we're going to do is the outside lead of the inside chain is going to group with one of these. And this is going to become our outside chain core. So then the inside core is going to become one of our outside leads. Now, this is where, if you want to really keep track and kind of elevate your pieces, is where you need to keep track of, do you want to start with the right on the inside or the left on the outside? Because we're going to have to do that exactly the same every single time. So this one would probably be best. So if we look at this piece, we're going to get a full square knot in the middle chain. So we're going to get a tab, like that little tab over the top, a little bite over the top, is going to alternate back and forth. At the same time, there's a front of a piece and a back of a piece, and they're two very different patterns. So if we start alternating which ones we use on the inside outside, you're going to start alternating between a back pattern and a front pattern. You could do either one. You can see this one kind of has the black stays on the outside and in the core, and then this one, it kind of just runs down the side. You don't really even see it in the core. So you could use either pattern. It's just going to depend on which way you start and staying consistent with that.
Okay, so when you're referring to the inside core and the outside lead, you're talking just specifically about for your front, which colors?
Yes. So the core is what you're knotting around.
Okay.
And then your leads are what you're knotting with.
Okay.
So my inside core, my inside chain core is both of these brown.
Mm-hmm.
My outside core is going to be one from the inside leads.
Okay.
And then one from the outside. Then my core actually becomes my lead for the outside chain. So I'm going to start from the inside. So I have these two here. I'm going to take one of my inside core and turn it into a lead, and I'm going to go right over left. So on this side, I'm always going to start right over left, and then I'm going to mirror it on this side. So this side is going to be right over left. This side is going to be left over right. And that's going to start making my outside chain, and it's going to keep them symmetrical and with the same pattern. So we have our right over left. We're going to go under, over, under, and through. And this is where you're going to find kind of there's a certain tension that you need to keep, or the knots aren't going to want to stack very nicely, especially on the first one. So I'm not going to cinch it down very tight. I'm going to go and make my full knot. And then now I'm going to start kind of working both of those down. So this one's not going to be super tight. I don't want to like really torque it down like I did the first one, because we're going to need a little bit of slack for these knots to start lining up. So that is done. We have one full square knot on the outside. And now we're going to go to our other side, which is the same thing here. So we have our one lead from the inside and one from the outside as our new core. We're going to start with left over right because we want to mimic, or we want to mirror the other side that we just did. And then we'll do one full square knot. And when you're starting out, like I said, it's not going to be super perfect, just because we're kind of getting everything in a line right now. From that first knot starting, it's a little all over the place, but we're gonna hopefully fix that. And since we did left over right, we're gonna go right over left to finish it out. And just like the other one, I did my full knot, and then I'm gonna start kind of lining it up. So there's our start. We have our center chain is started, and right now we're on our outside chain. I know this isn't exactly...
Okay, let's move the light.
It helps a little bit. I think that's as good as we're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
So then I don't have any pattern in mind. I didn't really, like I said, I didn't plan on this.
Chaos.
It's chaos. And I don't plan on doing a full piece. Doing one of these in my peak production time, if I was just kind of in that flow state, I could do one of these in about 50 minutes to an hour. I don't think I would be able to do that right now, but that's okay. So we're going to go and we're just going to do alternating. So we're going to do one full square knot on the outside. Now we're back to our inside core. We want to go with our gray here. And since I mean, we can't really see that. I know I started with left over right. So I'm going to start with right over left this time. And that's going to give us our bite over alternating each time we do this.
Okay. So each time you would alternate.
Each time we're going to alternate. Otherwise, see my pieces. I think there's one on there where I messed up a little bit. I can try and show that. There's no way I did these all perfect.
Maybe you did.
No
Maybe they're
way.
all perfect.
There's no way. No, because I was looking at one before and I noticed that I had messed up. Maybe that was one I didn't bring over here. I mean, it's going to be pretty hard to see anyways. But so if we, yeah, you're really not going to be see it. If we don't alternate, you're going to get this bite and it's going to make your piece lopsided because it's going to go down in a straight line. And this side's not going to have any bites. And it just, it doesn't look correct. I know it's like a very subtle thing, but it's all about the details. So I am, like I said, so I made a half a square knot and I'm able to tell because the bite is going over on the left. So the left is going to follow and that's going to make our complete square knot.
So if Jesse does it in an hour, I should plan on 6 hours, says Lori.
I would say you can just focus on finishing one because it's inevitable. You're probably going to make some mistakes, but instead of trying to just undo them, I would just say like, don't plan on having like a perfect finished piece. Really, it's all about like repetition. I got to the point of where I could do these like without even looking at them. So I would like put on a movie or like be like watching a show and just doing all the knots and just look down and be like, okay, I'm right where I should be and just keep going with it. So now that's done. So now we're gonna alternate here each one. So back to our outside. We're gonna switch. We're gonna do right over left. So I'm always gonna pick the inside strand and take it to the outside first. And that's gonna keep me right on track to make sure that my pattern stays the same. And whichever, like I said, it's going to have a different pattern depending on how you do it. As long as you do it consistently, it's going to look fine. And we want, like, again, we want to make sure with these outside ones, you can see we're going to start having kind of like a little gap. And we just want to make sure we don't tighten it too much because it's going to pull our chain out of alignment. So if I pull it too much, you'll see it kind of like goes actually out. To fix that, just take the outside lead and start pulling it back into place and like kind of give it a little shake and pull. If you need to, you could just kind of undo it a little bit and pull it. And so I tighten down on this. I'm going to tighten down to the inside chain, the inside square knot chain, so that I know I'm in alignment. And then I'm going to slide. See, this is why
mouth
I would do that.
Engaged.
Yeah. I think it's a lot easier because I could have so many different multiple points of tension. But I mean, the tying station works. It's a little different. I'm definitely not used to it. I did not practice at all doing this on a tying station.
Yes.
But I wanted to show you on this because I'm sure most people would probably have an easier time this way. So we made our full knot on the left. Now we're going to go to our right. And so we're starting from the inside and we're bringing it over. Outside is going over and under.
So would you recommend for people who are just starting out maybe using colors that contrast a little bit more?
Yes.
Yes. So
contrasting colors definitely helps.
Yeah. So Janet, these colors in person actually contrast quite a bit, but it's kind of rainy and dreary today. So we're having a little bit of a light issues. But absolutely, I would think 2 brightly different colors.
Yeah, so if you want to just start
help.
with black and white, I'm sure it would make things a little clearer. Ideally, I wanted to try and get larger hemp for this project, but that just did not happen. So I apologize there. Is that?
And Sylvia asks if we'll have time today to show the various ways that we end, in particular for the crimp ends.
So I don't have any crimp ends left, but the crimp ends are really, really easy. So all you do is kind of how we started. You're going to make one last square knot, but you're going to make it very, very tight and kind of slide it towards your stack. And that's going to help all of the knots before it and that last knot bite. Then this particular crimp that I used here, this is where the seam is. So these actually came, when it came, it was flat. It was maybe like kind of something like that. And so the ends just fold over. These are a little more difficult to work with, just so that they don't slide out. You really have to like crimp it and maybe even glue it if you can. And then really it's just cutting it off. I can show you how I would finish with a button, and then I can show you how I would finish with a bead. The bead is very simple. So we're just taking, we have a large hole bead. This is, I think, a 3mm drill hole. Again, we're doing that last knot. We're just going to do it really, really tight and cinch it against the previous knots. All the strands are going to go through the bead, and then we're just tying that single bite knot here. So just like how I started to make the starting loop, that's how we would finish it. I hope that answers the question. So we are back to our middle core here, and we want to make sure we're also using, like I said, I wanted the inside leads to be gray, so we do want to make sure we keep those in line. So put this here. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not ideal. I apologize for that. So no, we're going to start right. And we're back to our single chain on the inside. And sometimes with this inside chain, because there's so much tension pulling it from the outside, you actually will need to kind of like move it around a little bit. The like little loops will develop, and you want to make sure you get those out of there before you put your final knot in. Usually what'll happen is if you don't, and that little kind of extra slack is in there, once the piece is finished and starts getting worn, the tension will find its way out somewhere, and you'll have like kind of a little, like a loop will stick out. One of the knots will kind of half come undone, but it can't fully come undone. I mean, the beauty of working with cords and knots is that there's a lot of different knots. And once you start understanding like the theory behind working with knots, you can just start making your own patterns. There's all different methods. Like I said, for this class, like we're already at 3:45. So I want to just keep it simple and kind of demo from the basic square knots up to what is a double alternating square knot. So we just have.
That sounds scary.
It does sound scary, but
double alternating square knot.
So it's double because we have 2 sets of cores, and it's alternating because we're making knots on the inside, and then we're switching and making knots on the outside. So since we're at least to this point, I'm gonna do a half. So I'm gonna make a 1.5 on this inside core because I'm gonna add a bead to the outside strand. So I want a little bit of extra space to make that happen. So I put 1 extra half in, And then we can decide, let's see here. So I have these purple, I don't know, I guess these would be like what, 15 or 8 O's almost, something like that.
Yeah.
So I have some tiny little beads that have a larger drill hole. And so we can choose to, we could put it on the lead edge, which would make something like this, where it kind of sticks out to the side. Or, I don't know if I have any of that. So we'll do that because I don't have an example. We're going to use the inside. And slide that down. So we have our one bead on there, and we are back to the outside. So again, I'm always going to start from this for this pattern. And that's what I mean. So if I started from the outside on the outside core, it would be a totally different pattern than how I'm doing it, where I'm always starting from the inside and going out. And if you really want to start playing around with knots, that's why I said, like, your first piece of trying this kind of more complex knotting, don't worry about like being perfect, because you really want to like understand what does it look like when I take the inside and I go out? What does it look like when I take the outside and go in?
So we should plan on just having a couple of practice pieces.
Absolutely,
before we get into a real thing.
So I did that extra. That looks like it worked out perfectly. So I did the extra half square knot on that inside because I wanted to leave room for that bead to kind of breathe. I didn't want it to get smushed in there. And it looks like that was just enough. Yeah, and I mean, like I said, this is it's a ton. It takes time.
Mm-hmm.
It is definitely a process, and I want this. So I pulled that out because it was just a little too tight and it was getting pushed to the back. And then I'm going to tighten that knot down. Perfect. So you'll notice too, like for something like this, you can see there's a front and a back because I've pushed the beads to one side or the other, versus something like this where it's actually right in the middle. So they might want to pop out, but this one can go either side just because it's a little looser. Whereas what I'm doing here is I want it on the face because it's going to have a specific direction. So before I make that last knot, I'm just going to push it to the front side. And then when I tighten the knot down, it's going to keep it in place on the front side. You can push it through, but see, it doesn't really want to. And it wants to stay on that side. So we're going to mimic this or mirror this on the other side because we want to keep everything very symmetrical. So we're going to take our cord here and get another bead. And this is why it's so nice to use the nail polish, because something like this, it didn't really want to go through, but I have that little extra kind of plastic support.
Yeah.
And it made it much, much easier. So we're mirroring what I did on the left side. So we're going to take our inside core and we're going to go over to the outside. Straighten these out a little bit here. So to the outside, this is going to go over and under and through. And that's going to start our half. And the same thing, I'm going to like start this first knot, the first half of it. And then I'm going to kind of push the bead to the front side and tighten it down a little more that way because I want it to stay on the front side. And then we're here and we're going to finish this square knot.
Sylvia says that you're such a fabulous teacher, providing so much valuable info, tips, and encouragement.
Woohoo! Thank you. Yeah, like you said, a double alternating square knot chain. Sounds a little intimidating.
Yeah.
But we demoed the single square knot. So if you don't have a lot of knotting experience, that's where I would start. I would just start with the single square knot chain. Once you get that down and you're not making any kind of mistake where you're doing 2 halves in a row and getting a slight twist, and you're able to read your knots and say, oh, that's where okay, I need to finish this square knot, or I need to put a half here because I want my lead to end up on this side in this position. Then I would take on something like this. But my goal was that if you do have some knotting experience, you know your square knots, then this would be kind of the next level and you would be able to go here, versus if it's your first time, it seems a little chaotic, which it kind of is, but you just have that idea of what we're doing and the kind of the patterns we're going through.
Well, and now we have it as a resource. We can go back and watch it over again.
So we should be going back to our center core to start knotting again, but I'm going to take a bead and I'm going to put both center cords through that bead. And when I slide it up in place, there we go. You'll see that it kind of has like there's a little pocket that's made. And we're going to have that on both sides. So since we're not using the inside core, we didn't actually make any knots. We're going to skip that and we're going to go right back to the outside. You can make the knot, put the bead on, and then go to the outside and do the same thing. These larger knotting projects, they really are all about symmetry, because once it's finished, your eye is going to go right to where it's not symmetrical. And so we're going to start always, at least with this pattern, I'm going to always take the inside cord over to the outside, and then the outside is going to go under to make our half a square knot.
So I think Cindy answered the question for you, but Mary was asking, if you don't use a tying station, what do you use? And Cindy answered, random furniture, body parts, and teeth.
Yes. So my favorite way, or best way for me, is when I mentioned before, I'm going to take another piece of hemp. I'm going to put it through the loop I made to start my piece. And a lot of times I would like sit on the floor and I would wrap that around my ankle. And then I would take another cord and I would kind of wear it as a necklace and use that to tension the other side, so that if I need more tension away from me, I could just kind of slide my ankle away and it's going to pull all this tension out. And then for the opposite, if I need more tension in my direction, I could take the leads and pull kind of with my neck to tighten those. And then if I need to, then I also have my mouth that I could also hold, because when you get into 16 strands.
So you're a multi-function tool.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So we put that bead on the inside. We didn't do any knots on the inside, so we're not going to do any knots on the inside. We're going to go right back to the outside so that we keep that little extra pocket of space that's going to form. And because we're on the inside and we're mirroring, we're going to go from the inside and we're going to do left over right.
Janet says, but just don't stand up if you're doing the floor method.
You just have to make sure you let go of the one that goes around your neck.
Oh yeah.
Because if you try to stand up,
be very good.
You just kind of fall forward onto your face.
All right. Well,
part of that too is, like I said, it almost becomes meditative when you do it enough and you just like have all of the knot counts in your head, you know where you're at. And so you can kind of multitask, where, like I said, I'd be like watching a movie or I'd be on the phone and not paying as much attention to my knots. And I would do multiple bracelets in one sitting.
We'll get there. We'll get there, Jesse.
Okay.
Maybe by the third class.
So we put that bead through the middle. We went back to the outside. Now we're going to go back to the inside and we're going to finish this little section off. And we want to make sure, and sometimes your leads and cores can get kind of switched just from tension and pulling and making the knots. And so you don't actually have to use the same ones. You just need to make sure you use the same colors. So I'm pretty sure I started with left, so I'm going to do right. And if this is a mistake, then I will have an example of
what to do when we make a mistake.
Well, really, it's just you got to undo. I think I did make a mistake. That's okay. Good example. So we are okay. So let's see if we could pull this out and get maybe a little better view of what I was doing. Well, that's much better showing.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So did I make that mistake? No, I didn't. I actually did do it correctly. So here, actually, so when I started, I made the mistake. So it's going to be really hard to see, but here are those alternating bites that go over the top. So I have one on the right here, and then I also have one on the right here. So it kind of makes this line with these bites going over the top versus on this side, there's a bite and then a gap and then a bite. So I know it's really hard to see, but that is absolutely a mistake.
It's a happy little accident.
Yep. And so if that, I mean, like I said, it doesn't always have to be perfect. I don't think anybody would notice that because it's so early on and it kind of is hidden by one of the outside leads. But actually, yeah, you can see it here. So you'll see there's one bite there, and then that's the other alternate. There's another bite there, and another bite there, and another bite there. So there's this little tiny gap right here where there should be a bite, and it's not.
I think anyone who knits or crochets would know that that would be annoying.
It is. And that's why it can be really frustrating when you're starting out and you want to make it perfect.
You want to make a perfect Jesse piece, and you can't.
And after staring at it for like an hour or two, you don't even like see what's going on, and then you take a break and you come back and you're like, wow,
oh, what is that?
What did I do?
Why is that there?
And then I do have one more over here, I think, that we can maybe get some example from. Oh, not that one. So here's another piece that I started out. So I'm still using 8 strands, just like the one I was doing, but I just doubled everything up. I know it's black, but I just doubled everything up. So it's a very thick square knot. And then you can switch over and go into your patterns and then switch back. So it's really versatile. You could also knot over other knots. So if you want to go from, and that's what I did here, if you want to go from this wide pattern here and go, I wanted to go into this bead, but I wanted it tapered. So I made a square knot, and then I made another square knot on top of it. So then they're lined up to go back to just doubled up single square knots. So there's a whole lot you can do once you start really getting into knots. And if you love them, I'm sure you will. And then, so what I would do to finish, so this one is finished, but it does have some tails that I can work with. They are going to fray, so it might not work. So you can use buttons. Yeah, you can use buttons.
Well, how about you use mine? Because I've been over here. Jesse's using the hemp. I used B-Lon and beads from the December box. No idea how to end that, Jesse. It's all yours. I did pull out my button from the bead box too, though. And this is way too long. My loop is way too long.
Yeah.
But you can fix my mistakes.
So I this is actually like a regular button.
It is a regular
don't-
button.
My gut is telling me to not drop it.
To not drop
it. My gut is telling me.
You got it?
Nope, I think it went under your chair.
Oh, I think I have my other button. Luckily, there's another button.
So is this at a good length? You're happy with that?
Sure, yeah.
So if you do need extra length, you can put, just like we started with, that single bite, and you can put it at the end and then leave some space and put another one if you don't want to just keep knotting, or you want to try and just have a different feel to it. Or this is the case of if you get to the end of a piece and you don't have enough cord left to finish your piece. So say if I knotted all the way down to here and I realized, oh my goodness, I don't have enough cord left to actually finish this, I will unknot back to where I will have enough cord, put that single bite in, go down, put another single bite in, and that's going to be the end of my piece, making sure I have enough to put a button or a bead on it. So
I just don't know how to attach the button.
So this button, like this button here.
I'm gonna give you a little challenge. The little shank button.
I mean, there's kind of a couple ways we can go with it. I don't know which one's gonna work or be the best.
That's okay. Better than my way, which is no way.
So the first thing I want to do is get all the ends to roughly the same length, because it's just going to make it a lot easier to work with. And I don't know if we'll get all these through in one try, but we shall see. Okay, so we have our button on. We have all 4 cords through. So one way we can do it is we can use a double half hitch. So I'm not going to tighten this down, but so we have our 1 loop going through, and then we're going to come around and go the other way. So that's going to bite up to it, and that we could use that as a full stop.
Okay.
Another way.
I say you just do it.
Well, I want to try and get a good length on it. So
you see, I'm trying to trick him into finishing the bracelet for me. But he doesn't know that. Just ignore what I said just then. All right, you're a little off camera. There you go.
So, and so with this kind of cord too, like I was mentioning before, it really likes to bite on itself because it doesn't have any like extra space like hemp does. Yeah, it has no give to it. So these really like to kind of bite in on themselves, which is great.
So I'm assuming cotton would have the same amount of like
cotton would kind of be very similar.
What about silk? Can you macrame with silk?
You can macrame with anything.
Oh.
So, and then one thing that I would do with something like this is where I would use Elmer's glue.
Okay.
Because we can put Elmer's glue on these knots here to make sure that even if it does get kind of pulled and tugged in the wrong way, the glue will absorb into the material, versus the nail polish doesn't really absorb because it's quick drying. So this is where you can put Elmer's glue or E6000 if you want. You really want to make sure it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
You can put it right on the knots and just kind of work it in with your hand or your fingers. And that way, if for whatever reason the tension does start to come loose, the glue is actually going to stop it.
All right. Well, are there any last tips or tricks that you want to share?
Take breaks.
Take breaks.
Especially when you're working on bigger pieces, because so I worked on a custom ordered necklace and it took, I think it was like 175, no, it was 75 yards. So it was about 200 feet for the necklace. And it was a triple, double alternating. He wanted this very, very specific piece. And it took me about 40 hours to get to the end, to realize I made some mistakes that I had to go back and undo.
No.
So, and I was just doing like 6-hour stretches and not taking breaks. And your eye like, so our vision doesn't work the way we think it does. A small percentage of what we see is what we actually see. The rest, your brain just fills in like what it's used to, what it thinks should be there. So for stuff like this, when you're working with really small knots, it's good to take breaks and just let your eyes relax. You don't want to get a headache. You don't want to, make mistakes. And then the worst part is making a mistake back here and being down here and realizing it, versus do like an inch or two, take a break, come back, and then look at what you did. And you might see a mistake earlier than if not. Because that's what I did. I didn't take breaks and I ended up
having to
undoing about 15 hours worth of work, which took undoing these knots too takes a long time, because they all have a bite to the one before it. So it's not like when you're making the knots, you're just like, oh, knot. It's like you're picking at each one, undoing. It's a nightmare. So take breaks.
Take breaks, make mistakes.
Use a larger size. Predominantly what I use, this is all 10 pound, 8 to 12 pound hemp. Most of it's labeled as 10. This is like one of the finer grades of cordage that you can use. You have one as well, where I think yours is actually even finer than mine. And hemp is so cheap. You can go, and this is 120 pound. You can super, super thick. You could actually, so they would use this, and I've actually made rope out of it.
Oh yeah.
By twisting it and alternating it and tensioning it and stuff. And we towed a truck with it.
Wow.
Yeah, really cool.
Wow.
So you can get a whole, I think like probably 100 to 150 yards of this stuff for, I would say under $10. You can they also make twine. Twine isn't as good, but for a cheap way to practice, it's totally fine. So yeah, this is the like 8 to 12 pound stuff that I like to use. It's very consistent. Oh, that was something I wanted to mention. Before you start any knotting project, regardless of what material you're using, when I'm measuring out my strands, I am feeling the cord all the way down, because you will get little places like this, and you want to check your cord to make sure that it's not going to break. Or I know, so right here, you can see like how giant that piece is because the cord, like this stuff isn't as consistent and it's not high end. It's just like, this is the hippie stuff.
Yeah.
But you always want to check to make sure that there's not any breaks in your cord or these bulges. Sometimes you could fix the bulges in hemp by using like an X-Acto knife and cutting out the extra material. Sometimes you can't. And then you're just going to, when you check and you find it, you're just going to not be able to use that piece. You can save it. I have pieces that are like this long all the time because I can use it. I could make a loop. I could tie something to something else. You could always kind of figure out a use for it.
So Sylvia asks, when you plan the length, do you take into consideration that the piece may stretch over time?
Not really. I mean, they will stretch, but something like this, like you can see it stretches a tiny little bit. Something like this is an anklet I've been wearing for like a couple of years. And because I don't really put any tension on it and there's no weight, it's still the same size and shape for the most part. The only thing with a necklace, if there's something heavy on it, with these kind of knots, it will kind of get skinnier and pull out. Lengthwise, it's not going to be a whole lot in length, but these pieces like made with these materials, they don't last forever and they actually require a lot of care. So when I make these pieces for people, I let them know that. And I'm like, if you wear it every day and you wear it and
in
you
the pool,
in the pool,
and,
in the shower,
Yeah.
when you work out and you get sweat on it and stuff, that's going to factor into the life expectancy of your piece. So if you want to wear it every single day and never take it off, maybe 2 or 3 years it's going to last before things start to break, before it gets a weak spot and you catch it on something and it just rips. Just the nature of these kind of pieces.
Yeah. And then Sylvia also asks, have you ever macrameed with leather?
So I have. When I was in Tucson last year, we were at a maker soiree, and I don't remember which company it was, but they had sections of leather. And so you can absolutely do this with leather. I would recommend 1 or 1.5 millimeter, and be mindful that you can't over tension the leather. It'll start to crack, or yeah, this is exactly the size I was using. So you can use this stuff. Absolutely. It will work.
A little further up. There you go.
Yeah, this stuff will work. I literally got to see it. So this stuff will work. You're gonna, it takes a little bit more effort to make consistency through it, because
and I would think
you
it wouldn't
can't
have
pull
the
it
bite,
as hard. It
right?
won't bite as hard.
Yeah.
And so you really have to slide and stack your knots.
Okay.
For the pattern that I was demoing on this, it's very difficult to do and put beads on the outside, because like when you start pinching it is when you're going to start cracking the coating.
Okay.
And if you start cracking the coating, you're probably going to end up breaking it. And so eventually I made maybe like 10 or 15 rows in, and I broke a lead off.
Oh no.
Which is fine. I was just testing to see how this stuff works. If you really want to use leather, I would get an uncoated, more natural leather that's also softer. So it's going to have
a little bit more forgiving.
It's going to be more forgiving. It's going to actually bite on itself. It's going to be more workable. You don't have to worry about cracking it because there's no coating on the outside. So more of like a traditional, you can even see there's a little blemish on it.
Yes.
Which that, if you're knotting, like as soon as you start putting it in a knot, it's just going to crack.
It's just going to crack.
So yes, you can use these, but I would recommend a more natural style leather. Square leather can actually work really well, but you guys have to be very mindful of the placement of your knots and making sure you're not twisted up at all, because that'll show through. But it can definitely be done. And I've seen some wonderful projects. I've made my bracelet turned into a keychain, but it did come out great.
It's fine.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I think that was it for questions. Oh, Cindy says, I wonder if you can run beeswax on the leather, as that helps the bite.
You probably could. I don't know if you can with this though, because of the coating on it. It's not like
maybe the natural leather.
Yeah, uncoated natural leather, you can totally use beeswax. The only thing with that is if you have a lighter leather, anything you add to it's going to darken it a little bit. So you might want to take that into consideration. Although if it's if like a bracelet, it's going to absorb some oils from your skin to begin with, so it might not look, after a little bit you won't notice it. But I think it'll have a weathered look to it. The other thing is you could just treat your whole working pieces with beeswax and have that consistency,
and then it would all look the same.
And you wouldn't have to worry about it.
Jesse, thank you so much for this first class. It is not going to take 3 more years before we get him here again. Maybe a month, maybe 2 months. We'll see. I mean, we've got a big.
There's just so much stuff going on.
There's so much stuff going on.
There's all these awesome designers that do this way more than I do. I go through kind of phases of this because it's a little more difficult to get the price I want, because I'm not going to make things and undersell them. That doesn't make any sense to me. I would rather just keep them for myself. I'll give them away as gifts. But that's why I switched to kind of like a higher end with more gemstones, because that's what my clientele developed. That's what they progressed into. So I was making these for my customers. That's how I got them, was all of this kind of stuff. And then I started making pieces on stretch
Mm-hmm.
with nice crystal cords and all that kind of stuff, and they loved it.
Gemstones and macrame. Sounds like the title of our next class. Your next class.
Oh, I didn't use any gemstones.
You didn't use gemstones.
So you can. It's a little more tedious, or having large hole beads.
Mm-hmm.
But a large hole bead is usually bigger than I'd want to use. So that's why the seed beads work really well. Like these seed beads that I'm using, they typically have like a larger like drill hole. Some gemstones like this. So I do have tourmaline on this on the outside. Some of them like barely fit. Oh, I love cracked quartz and like cracked beads. So this is, I don't even know what it is, but it's cracked and I love it. So these are, you can use gemstones. Oh, this is the cracked quartz, right? Yeah. Or cracked agate. That's the tourmaline and black onyx. So you can, I can't see where it is.
It's okay.
So you can use gemstones.
Welcome to our world.
Absolutely. That's why I put the clear nail polish coating on, because these have smaller drill holes, usually about 1 millimeter plus or minus a little bit. And that's why I also want extra length, because a lot of times you'll get the coated tip part through the bead. And then when you pull, the right where the coating stops catches a little bit and starts to fray. And so then you're cutting like an inch off and then putting more of the nail polish coating on. And so having extra is always going to be better. Eventually, if you do this enough, you'll get to where you know exactly what your measurements are going to be for the length that you're trying to use without having too much extra, but always having enough to, like, I usually want to have at least probably an extra 2 feet. 1, because I'm going to be cutting tips off, but 2, I can't make knots with this. So even this, like there's, you know, that's probably 5 inches worth of cord, but trying to make knots with that is very difficult. So you always want a good working edge, and then always leave rooms for error if for whatever reason you're just cutting a bunch of extra tips off because the bead holes are a little small and they're just fraying everything really badly. And I mean, this type of material is so cheap. I would much rather have a whole bunch of scraps than have a 5-hour piece that I can't do anything with it. So,
well, thank you so much for this intro. We are so happy. 3 years in the making, we finally have a Jesse class, and we hope that you try some of these techniques and you post them in the gym chat so we can all see. Remember, mistakes are good at the beginning. We want to see them all.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone, and we hope that you enjoy your day, your evening, your morning. All right. Goodbye, everyone.